Welcome to the Fit Factor podcast, where we discuss health and fitness for those who may have mistakenly thought that their best, healthiest days were behind them. That's about to change. What's going on? What's going on? What is going on? How we doing today? Welcome to the Fit Factor podcast. My name is Nathan Redmond, and I am the owner of It Factor Coaching in Houston, Texas, where I basically spend every day of my life helping adults win in their health. I say this a lot, especially in person, when I speak to different groups, but there are far too many adults in America that are not. They're just simply not winning in their health. And so that's what I try to help people do every day, is win in their health, turn the ship around. So this podcast, Fit Factor, is all about health and fitness and just talking about things that are important to the average everyday person who's just looking to make some changes in their fitness and in their health and in their wellness and their life in general. But today we're going to talk about a topic that is very popular. I see this popping up all the time on whether it be YouTube or different podcasts or any number of means of publication. This is a really hot topic, and it has been for I'm going to just guesstimate at least 10 years. I feel like at least 10 years this has been a hot topic. But, every day there's somebody that gets introduced to it that hasn't really, dove in and tried to understand it or learned about it. And so today I want to talk a little bit about intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting, like I said, it's gotten pretty popular. A lot of people have tried it. A lot of people do it. A lot of people like it. A lot of people have done it and not been successful at whatever it was that their end game was when they decided to try intermittent fasting. But I want to talk a little bit about intermittent fasting today. And I want to preface it by saying this. There are as many, how do I say this? There's a lot of differing opinions about intermittent fasting. There's differing opinions about everything in the scientific community. We just came out of a season of 3 years of experts, quote unquote, and I use that term very loosely, disagreeing on how to treat the COVID virus, on how to prevent the COVID virus. Everything from masks work to masks don't work, to we need to be outside and distance, to, well, as long as you're 3 feet away. And good Lord have mercy. You know what I'm talking about. There are so many disagreements in the world of COVID. Just take that concept of disagreements among people who call themselves experts and then just slide over to intermittent fasting, and you'll find just as many disagreements. So what I want to try to do today is I want to try to avoid disagreeable points. I want to try to stick to some practical and some factual aspects of intermittent fasting, because there's definitely some things that are unarguable. They're black, they're white, they're wet, they're dry, they're hot, they're cold. There's no arguing some aspects of intermittent fasting. And so I want to stick to those particular things today and try not to get too far into the weeds, because, geez Louise, out in the weeds, I guess you can get attention out in the weeds. You can definitely make a name for yourself if you stay out in the weeds, but I'm going to try to avoid that for your sake, because you're the reason that I'm doing this podcast. So I just want to help you out. So intermittent fasting. What is intermittent fasting? Well, go back to the beginning of mankind. If you're a Christian or a Bible-believing person, you immediately think Adam and Eve. if you don't believe that that's where humans began, and you believe in evolution, and you believe at some point we were amoebas, and then we were some sort of other creature that developed in, and eventually we were apes, and eventually we were people. And if you believe that, that's irrelevant. One thing that is completely relevant and undeniable is that there was a time in human history when food was scarce. There was a time in human history when human beings had to, not wanted to, but had to go extended amounts of time without food. You know, thousands of years ago, you didn't just run to the grocery store to buy snacks. When you needed something for dinner, you didn't just run down to Whole Foods and grab you some bison burgers, or go get you a gallon of milk at the grocery store, or even at the convenience store on the corner. Food was hard to come by. And literally, I mean, I wasn't there, you weren't there, but I think it's pretty simple. If we just are rational and look at history, we can very clearly see that there was times when people would have to literally go days without eating. And so they were unintentional. They weren't wanting to fast. They weren't wanting to not eat. It was just how life was. You may kill a buffalo or a deer or catch a fish or whatever it is to eat, and that might be the only food you eat for days. So our bodies, just through the natural process of human development, we have a natural capacity to go extended amounts of time and still live. And so if there was any one quote unquote diet, and I usually don't use that word because I kind of hate that word, but the truth of the matter is there's a lot of diets out there. But if there was any one diet that really had some application to the way humans were wired and the way we were created and the way we're designed, it might be the most accurate, it might be the most appropriate type of diet for a human being to participate in, because our bodies are designed to be able to go long periods of time, days, even weeks, without eating. I mean, I have friends today, here we are, 2023. I have friends of mine that go on extended fasts, 20, 30, 40-day water fasts. And that still happens on a routine basis. You can find plenty of people. If you just get on YouTube and search fasting out, you'll find people that will intentionally go a week, 2 weeks, 3, 4 weeks without eating, and they'll just drink water. And they survive. And our bodies have a way and have a mechanism of tapping into stored fat, even tapping into lean mass if necessary, so that we will survive and be able to get through those times of not eating. So intermittent fasting is really something that our bodies are kind of wired for. Our biology is wired for these long bouts without food. So let's talk a little bit about just what it is, because obviously, you know, thousands of years ago, we unintentionally fasted. But now here we are, 2023, with food everywhere and ample supplies of food. We can fast intentionally. We can make a choice to go extended amounts of time without eating for various purposes. And we're going to talk about some of those purposes and some of the benefits, proven benefits of intermittent fasting. But to call it fasting, some people they would correct you. The purists out there would say, well, it's intermittent fasting is not really actually fasting. It's really more time restricted feeding. Time restricted feeding is a little bit more appropriate and accurate for people that do true day on, day in and day out fasts without food. So time restricted feeding / intermittent fasting really is when you intentionally take windows of your day for extended amounts of time and don't feed your body. The most common fast that every human being on the planet participates in every day is actually broken with what's called breakfast. Break fast. That's where the word breakfast comes from. Every single day when you go to bed, let's say you go to bed at 10 p.m. and you wake up at 6 a.m., You have just gone an 8-hour window without eating. If you ate right when you went to bed and you ate as soon as you got out of bed, you fasted for 8 hours. That's where the term breakfast comes from, breaking your fast. So that's a small window of time, but just conceptually, you can see how we all fast, but some of us choose to fast longer than others. So in a intermittent fast / time restricted feeding, you pick windows of time where all you do is drink water. And sometimes some people will say, I drink black coffee, I drink unsweetened tea. Typically speaking, if you get into a conversation with people that are familiar with intermittent fasting, they'll say, hey, you can drink anything if it doesn't cause an insulin release. Once you release insulin, that's the breaking of the fast. So black coffee does not release insulin. Black tea does not release insulin. Water does not release insulin. There's even some things you can put in your black coffee that people will use that are fasting people that will allow you to not have an insulin release. But we're just basically talking about picking a window of time where you don't eat. A starting point for intermittent fasting would probably be somewhere in the range of about what we would call a 14-10. Now, 14, the first number, represents the amount of time during the day consecutively, how many hours you're going to go without feeding your body. So for 14 hours in a 14-10 fast, for 14 hours, you don't eat. And then you get all your calories in that 10-hour window. One of the more popular ways of doing it is what's referred to as a 16-8 fast. And a 16-8 fast simply means that you take 16 hours consecutively and you don't feed your body. And you eat all of your calories within an 8-hour window. So let's say you stop eating at 8 p.m. Well, you start eating at noon. Well, there's an 8-hour feeding window. You stop eating at 8 p.m. You don't eat again until noon the next day. That's a 16-hour window of not eating. And then at noon, you get to eat, and you eat all your calories between noon and 8. The next step up from there is very popular as well, is an 18-6. So in that same example, I don't want to eat past 8 p.m. Well, you don't eat before 2 p.m. Hey, I want to jump in here right quick and say a quick word for my company, It Factor Coaching. You guys already know this, but I'm a certified health coach, nutrition coach, personal trainer, and I've got so many things that I'm doing right now that are virtual that give me the capabilities of coaching you and coaching people that you know from wherever they are in the world. I just recently launched 2 particular coaching platforms for nutrition coaching and for personal training that are both virtual. I'm writing nutrition plans and coaching people on their nutrition from anywhere in the world, and I'm doing the same thing with personal training, all through an app, all with me directly writing programs and plans for individual clients based on their needs, their goals, their lifestyles. It's unbelievable the capability that we have with technology these days. So if you're looking for a little bit of help, maybe you don't want to pay the big fees of a personal trainer in person, but maybe you want to have somebody that can work with you virtually and save yourself hundreds and hundreds of dollars per month on training. Maybe that'd be something I can help you out with. So just head over to my website, itfactorcoaching.health, and you can get in touch with me there, and we can get the ball rolling on helping you crush those health goals. And then there's a very popular approach right now, and you can mess with these windows as much as you want. You can go 18-6, you can go 19-5, you can go 20-4. You can mess with these windows as much as you want. And there's a really popular approach right now that if you kind of look for it, you'll see that it's pretty common, and it's simply referred to as OMAD. OMAD stands for one meal a day, OMAD, OMAD. So there's a lot of folks out there that do this OMAD approach where they'll eat one ginormous meal every single day, and then the rest of the day and then throughout the night they don't eat. So intermittent fasting is nothing more than picking a window of time where you refuse to put any sort of food or beverages in your body that would cause an insulin release. Now, I've personally done a 16-8 and loved the way I felt, and I've done an 18-6 and I loved the way I felt. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I've actually dabbled in this, which is one of the reasons I wanted to talk about it, because I have experimented with various quote unquote diets that are out there, just to kind of see what's the hoopla, what's going on with this, So I've experimented a little bit with this, and to be quite honest with you, I loved the 18-6 window. I loved eating at 2 p.m., getting all my calories in by 8 p.m. and calling it a day, or maybe noon and 6. But I loved the 18-6. So these are approaches. 14-10, you could go 12-12. You can flip it on and go 10-14. There's all sorts of ways you can do it. But generally speaking, most people, when they do an intermittent fast, the real intermittent fasters out there will generally fast no less than 16-8. That's a pretty common standard place. And if you want to try intermittent fasting and you want to try to do this, my suggestion is this, and I've told plenty of people this that I coach in nutrition coaching, say, start small, start with a 14-10, and then you work your way up to maybe a 15-9, and then go to that 16-8, and just kind of baby step your way, maybe a week on the first phase. You may even go 12-12. All right, for a week, I'm going to do 12 hours of restriction, and then eat all my food within a 12-hour period. And then I'm going to go to the 14-10, and then I'm going to go work my way up to the 16-8, and just kind of baby step your way up. But that's basically what intermittent fasting is: time restricted feeding, picking these blocks of time where you don't eat. So one of the things that I personally experienced whenever I was intermittent fasting that I enjoyed the most was I thought very clearly. I had a really sharp cognitive ability during my fasting windows. So if I was doing an 18-6, during those 4 or 5 hours leading up to when I was going to eat, let's say I was going to start eating at 2, somewhere around 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, for about a 2 or 3 hour, maybe 4 hour window, I thought really, really clearly. I felt like I was really sharp. And I generally felt like I had a lot of energy during those times as well. And we're going to talk about what was causing that as we talk about some benefits of intermittent fasting. But the cognitive ability is very widely, and this is all anecdotal. This is not necessarily scientific, although you could probably find plenty of research and publications and journals and reports and things like that would specifically say improves cognitive ability. You could easily find that kind of stuff on paper. And I'm just telling you anecdotally, for me and from people that I've talked to, they've always felt like they thought really quickly. They had really sharp cognitive ability while they were doing this time restricted feeding. So let's talk about a few benefits. I'm going to talk about maybe 3 or 4 benefits that can come that are proven. These are not debatable. These are not, you can't argue these. There's nobody's going to disagree with you on these. I guess, well, technically these days people can disagree with you on just about anything, right? But these are generally not going to be disagreement points. So one of the things that's very powerful about intermittent fasting is that it positively impacts your hormones. So a few specific hormones. The first one is that your insulin levels drop significantly during an intermittent fast. I mean, if you think about it, if insulin is produced when there's glucose in the blood and you're going 14, 15, 16, 18 hours without eating, naturally your blood sugar is going to not necessarily be low, but you're not going to have a lot of blood glucose flowing around to trigger insulin to be released. So one of the things about insulin that we've talked about before in some different different podcasts talking about some different things is that insulin is a fat storage hormone. Anytime you have high levels of insulin in your blood, it makes it very difficult to burn fat. It's just the nature of insulin. So by intermittent fasting, you lower your insulin levels, and that can actually help contribute towards your body being able to tap in to stored fat. One of the things our bodies are really great at is using fat as energy when we're in a very low caloric demand. In other words, when we're just sitting at the desk, maybe when we're driving, when we're at work, when we're not necessarily exercising, our bodies are really, really good at burning fat if our insulin levels are low. If your insulin levels are high, totally different story. But from a hormone standpoint, when you do intermittent fasting, if you have a long enough window of not eating food, your insulin levels are going to come down. It's going to make it easier for you to burn fat just as a fuel to just get through your regular routines of the day. So that's one hormone that we see positively impacted by intermittent fasting is it lowers your insulin levels. Now, if it's lowering your insulin levels, one other thing that's been found is that it helps reduce insulin resistance. So if you have type 2 or pre-diabetes and you know automatically if you have either of those, you have insulin resistance. It's not a matter of if, it's the insulin resistance was the first domino to fall before you ever got type 2 or became pre-diabetic. So when you can drop your insulin levels, that's going to have a positive impact on you being able to heal your insulin resistance. So that's been proven as well. So these are some powerful things that come from intermittent fasting. So insulin is one. The second thing that hormonally is that you have an increase of human growth hormone when intermittent fasting. Your HGH is what it's referred to for short. So you have higher levels of HGH, higher levels of this human growth hormone. That also helps facilitate fat burning, and it helps facilitate muscle gain. Human growth hormone is that hormone that when we were younger, and especially when we were in puberty and we were really growing fast, having that growth spurt that we always hear people talk about is whenever teenagers are growing very quickly, that growth spurt, human growth hormone is a big key player in that. So intermittent fasting has been proven to increase HGH. Another thing that it does is it helps repair your cells. There's a term in science that's referred to as autophagy. Autophagy. This is a word you'll hear a lot when you are just listening to and research and hearing discussions on intermittent fasting. Is the concept of autophagy. And basically what autophagy is whenever you're intermittent fasting, the longer you can go into a fast, the more your body will start to take out the trash, so to speak. The broken cells, the damaged cells, the things in your body that just need to be either healed or repaired or just removed in general. All right, oxidative stress gets reduced. Autophagy is just this way of taking out the trash. Your body has a way of cleaning out all of the junk that's in your body, and that's basically autophagy. And intermittent fasting has been proven to increase autophagy. So you can take out the trash, you can increase your human growth hormone, you can reduce your insulin levels, increase your fat burning capability, increase your ability to gain and build muscle. All right. A lot of people will tell you that this autophagy concept is actually very anti-cancer. So that's something to take into consideration as well. And that might be one of those things that's debatable. You know, somebody might argue with you on that, but it is something that seems to be very widely agreed upon. And so that's just like a little side note nugget there, not trying to pick any fights, but there might be some evidence towards helping to prevent cancer with intermittent fasting. Now, one thing we do know is that cancer loves sugar. Cancer loves glucose. One thing that you'll find pretty consistently is studies that show that people that cut their carbs way, way back can see dramatic improvements in the cell reproduction, I guess you could say, in cancer. You can see improvements in cancer because cancer loves sugar. It feeds off of sugar. It feeds off of glucose. And so when you're doing intermittent fasting and you're getting your blood glucose down and you're restricting those carbs from your body, the positive impact of that could have some benefits in the world of reducing, healing, reversing, however you want to verbalize that, with cancer. Okay. So here's one thing that we most commonly see with intermittent fasting and kind of the motive. Very few people will go, well, I'm going to do intermittent fasting because I really want to bring my insulin levels down. I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that. Now, I have personally recommended intermittent fasting to type 2 diabetic clients for that purpose, but they didn't come to me and go, hey, I really want to bring my insulin levels down, so I'm going to do intermittent fasting. Occasionally, but not often. I've never had anybody come to me or say to me, yeah, I'm going to do intermittent fasting because I really want to increase my HGH. I've really never had anybody say, hey, I'm going to do intermittent fasting because I want to, increase my autophagy rates, clean out the dead cells and the damaged cells. No, you don't really hear that. But here's one thing I have heard a lot. And most people that I talk to that have done intermittent fasting, quite honestly, they've done it as a means of trying to lose weight. Now, intermittent fasting can definitely help you lose weight. Definitely. Theoretically, intermittent fasting works on both sides of the calorie equation. Because what we do know is that intermittent fasting boosts your metabolic rate, your metabolism speeds up, and that's your calories out. That's your burning of calories. So you increase your calorie burn with intermittent fasting. And then if you do it properly, and this is the catchy part, this is the tricky part that a lot of people fail on. If you do it properly, it will reduce the amount of food that you eat. It will reduce the amount of calories that you take in. Because if you're eating in a small window of time, if the foods you choose, and this is important, I need you to you might want to write this down. If the foods that you choose are not satiating foods, satiating meaning filling and making you feel fuller for longer, if the foods that you're choosing are not satiating foods, and all you do during your feeding window is just snack and eat, you might not be able to lose any weight at all, because when at the end of the day, if you're eating as many calories as you're burning, whether you're doing intermittent fasting or not, you're not going to lose weight. If your goal is to lose weight with intermittent fasting, you have to make sure that you stay in a deficit. One of the best ways to stay in that deficit is to eat satiating whole foods, that you're not craving food every 30 minutes. And that's what kicks a lot of people in the butt whenever they do intermittent fasting, is they go 14, 15, 16, 18 hours without eating. And then when it's time to eat, it's like, they just raid the fridge. It's like feeding lions at feeding time. They just absolutely devour everything in sight. And even at that, the things that you eat matter so much. I mean, there's a big difference between 200 calories worth of chicken breast and 200 calories worth of Twinkies. Not the same. Don't tell me that a calorie is a calorie, because those are not the same. Big difference in the nutritional value of a chicken breast versus a pack of Twinkies. So if you're going to do intermittent fasting for the purpose of losing weight, you have to make sure that you're staying in a calorie deficit, even though you're eating all that food in a short period of time. Eating whole foods, eating fibrous foods, eating foods that are very high in protein, that's going to limit your cravings, and that's going to reduce your hunger, so that you can stay in a solid calorie deficit during that fast. And if you can do that consistently, day after day, and then week after week, and eventually month after month, you're going to see results. You can't help but do it. And then you get all the other benefits of the fasting window, which is the insulin the drop in insulin, the increased age, all those things, all the things we talked about. Okay. So a lot of people that are trying intermittent fasting are doing it to lose weight, but a lot of people don't. They're not successful because they're overeating. They're eating processed foods. They're going to the drive-thru. Well, I'm not going to mention any names. I don't want to get sued, but they're going to the drive-thru a couple times a day during their window. That's just, spinning your wheels. You're wasting your time. It's not going to work. All right. You got to eat healthy. All right. Next thing, beyond the weight loss thing. We talked a little bit about this. We kind of hinted at it a little bit. We're going to talk more specifically now. Intermittent fasting has been proven time and time again that it can reduce, we mentioned this, insulin resistance, and it can help lower your risk for type 2 diabetes. And if you have type 2 diabetes, it can help reverse your type 2 diabetes. All right. There have been human studies done, not animal studies, which there have been those too, but there have been human studies done on intermittent fasting. And these studies have found that blood sugar has been reduced through intermittent fasting by anywhere from 5 to 10% over a course of 8 to 12 weeks of intermittent fasting. These are pre-diabetic people. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot. 5 to 10%, it's kind of like insignificant. But here's what's really cool. I mentioned earlier that insulin resistance is the first domino to fall when it comes to developing prediabetes and eventually type 2 diabetes. What they found in these same studies, in this 8 to 12 week study with human beings, is that they were able to reduce their fasting insulin by 20 to 30%. That is significant. If you can take someone who has insulin resistance and might not even know it, because let's face it, there's no symptoms for it. If you take somebody with insulin resistance and they do intermittent fasting and they can reduce their insulin, their fasting insulin, by 20 to 30%, that is a game changer. That's a game changer. So your fasting insulin, and I've talked about this in another podcast way back towards the beginning, maybe episode 2 or 3, I don't even remember. We've talked about this a little bit, but the fasting insulin is the key first step to preventing type 2 diabetes, because insulin resistance is phase 1. You know, people can be insulin resistant literally for years before they develop type 2 diabetes, or before they even show up as pre-diabetic on an A1C test. You could have a perfectly normal A1C and still be developing insulin resistance. And one of the things I've talked about before is when you get blood work done, especially if you're overweight. If you're overweight and you go in and get blood work done, specifically ask your doctor, hey, I want a fasting insulin test. Make sure you do a fasting. They generally won't do that. You have to ask for it. But if you'll ask for a fasting insulin test, that sucker will come back, and that will be really the data that you need to see if you don't show up on the A1C scale or even on the fasting glucose scale. If those two things don't show you to have issues, the fasting insulin could show the beginning of some problems. And so fasting, intermittent fasting, can help reduce your fasting insulin by 20 to 30%. And like I said, that's a game changer. So intermittent fasting is it's widely understood and widely agreed upon, especially by people that have done it, to have some really, really great benefits. But you have to approach it with the right game plan. You have to avoid highly processed foods during your feeding window, avoid the drive-through, avoid the fast food, avoid the pizza buffet, avoid all the things that get you in trouble and cause you to have poor health if you weren't fasting. Shift yourself over as much as humanly possible to a whole food diet. I'm not talking go vegan. I mean, just real food, things that God made, meats, vegetables, fruits, things that our bodies were designed to fuel off of, not the trash that we get at 80% of the grocery store. Is trash. 80%, period. Hard stop. It's trash. But if you'll shift yourself over and just shop on the outside edge of a grocery store and stay out of the aisles as much as humanly possible, you will definitely be able to see a difference if you do this intermittent fasting approach. So there's a lot of benefits to intermittent fasting. It's easy to do. I mean, what's easier than not eating? I mean, seriously, how easy is it to just not do something? Don't eat. Pretty daggum easy to just not eat. Doesn't take a game plan, doesn't take a strategy. It doesn't take putting it on your calendar. You don't have to remember. There's nothing easier than not eating. So if you want to try something that's easier than anything that's out there, I can't think of anything easier than just simply not eating for a period of time each day. for a period of time each day. All right. Like I said before, I tried the 16-8, loved it. Went to an 18-6, loved that. Okay. That was my sweet spot, that 16-8 to 18-6 kind of a deal. Saw tremendous response from my body, had some really good physical evidence in the mirror type of results from that. So it might be something that's worth a shot if you're just looking to improve your overall health. And any of those benefits that we listed out, if those sound like those are things that you would like to experience, then intermittent fasting might be a great way for you to go. So I'm going to keep it simple there. There's so many more things we could go into, but my gosh, this is an introduction. I even wrote down on a piece of paper, Intermittent Fasting 101. So that's basically what I wanted this to be, was just an introduction, some basic, 50,000 foot view stuff of intermittent fasting / time restricted feeding. So hopefully that's helpful for you. And if you do it, I'd love to get some just like feedback. I'd love to get some feedback from you. You can find me on Facebook. You can find all my social media handles in the notes for this show. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on TikTok. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on my website. So many places to find me, but I would love to hear some reports. If you decide you're going to try, just kind of experiment a little bit with intermittent fasting, I'd love to hear how it goes. I'd love to just get a little report. And if it's great, I'd love to hear it. If you hated it, I'd love to hear it. But just want to lay some things out for you, just some basics. You start small, work your way up. Eventually, I promise you, the way intermittent fasting works, if you'll work your way up to that 16-8, 18-6, you will be amazed at how you're not hungry for hours and hours and hours on end. There were times when I would not eat until 2 p.m. and I was never hungry the entire time of that particular day. And you would think somebody would just want to ravage food. But it's amazing what this will do to crushing your appetite and your hunger levels. And so, like I said, I'd love to get a report from you guys if you try this out. So I hope this was helpful. I appreciate you stopping by. And if you would, it would mean the world to me if you would just swing on into the podcast platform with Apple and leave a review. I'd love to get a review from you. That'll definitely help the algorithm, and maybe some more people will find this and we can help some more people out. So you guys have a fantastic day, and I am out.